Tango ekomaka, daina komi moto, ona bango.
Greetings to everyone and welcome to those who are joining us. First on this session, we are looking at it's a special policy dialogue forum on Zoom. We are looking at the 55th ANC National Conference, the state of the nation, politics, the economy, and the road ahead. I have to state at the outset that we were not expecting the dramatic events that happened overnight, namely the Phala report. But nevertheless, it is contextual to our discussion. It's all about the ANC. Hello, you had muted me, David. Hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So basically, okay, we thought that the occasion of the national conference would be an appropriate entry point into a discussion of the political economy of South Africa, with focus on the ANC, the oldest nationalist movement in Africa. But more important, the governing party in South Africa. And it is the party that, through which the post-apartheid state has been evolving. It is the party which has been responsible or held responsible for all that has happened. Not totally, but in a large measure. So both the successes and failures are invariably held against the ANC. And the discussion tonight, regrettably, has to begin with some reference to the Phala issue, not least because of the enormous interest it has aroused, speculation including wild speculation on social media that not only Cyril Ramaphosa, who said is likely to resign, but even that the government, there may be no government by next week. Very speculative. do we know, as political economists ourselves, that no class goes down without a fight? And it's too early yet, in my view. All the same, we want to reflect on these and other matters without losing sight of the broader issues that we put ourselves to discuss today, namely the national question in South Africa, the nature of the politics, the nature of the economy, and of course, the road ahead. I should add that what happens in South Africa is so important, and there's ramifications for us in the region. And as someone said, if South Africa coughs, we also cough. But so entwined is South Africa's history with the rest of the region, and indeed Africa, that we cannot ignore the enormous developments taking place in South Africa, good and bad. So to help us in this discussion, I have a very eminent panel, in the sense that we've sought to bring to the discussion people with enormous experience in the post-apartheid era in particular, but also in terms of the actual work they're doing in South Africa, and seized as they are, all of them, with the situation in South Africa. Our first speaker would be Khulu Mbatha. Dr. Mbatha got his PhD from Frederick Schiller University. But more significantly, he hails from the Soweto uprising days when he was a student in Zululand and went into exile thereafter. And with the ANC and I almost said at independence. At the end of apartheid, he came in as a civil servant, variously advisor to vice presidents, to Foreign Minister Nzo at that time, the diplomat, and significantly he's an author. In 2017, he published a book entitled Unmasked: Why the ANC Failed to Govern, 2017. And I'm also looking forward to his personal story of the 1976 generation, which he published in June this year. Then there's Tessa Dooms, the director of Jasoro Consulting. Significantly, she was appointed in 2015 to the National Planning Commission to advise the president on the implementation of the National Development Plan of South Africa. She's a sociologist by training and very active in the Rivonia circle. And we have Samkele Maseko, who most of us are familiar with, a journalist, a renowned journalist, South African journalist, who has the developments in South Africa at his fingertips, I might say. But many of us have seen him active on SABC, and he has been active in other news channels before that. Last but not least, Phakaliwe Majola, a graduate in international relations from WITS, a broadcaster, but most important of all, she comes from NUMSA, National Union of Mine Workers of South Africa. And she'll be bringing to us the dimension of the unions, the views of the unions, and also reflecting on the current politics. So, I want to begin with Khulu Mbatha. Khulu, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, welcome. So, face to face, after many conversations the last few days, as I said in my introduction, the elephant in the room, the palapala. Can you help our audience understand what's the main import of the report that the panel has just released? what are the main elements of it?
Thank you, Ivo, for the introductory remarks. Good evening to you. Good evening to my fellow panelists, and good evening to the viewers and those that have joined us. Well, the elephant in the room is that the independent panel led by former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo and appointed by Phakaliwe Majola, Speaker of Parliament, made damning findings against President Ramaphosa. These were related to the theft that is found on the panel. In terms of what is in the report is that he failed to convince the panel that he acted in accordance with the law and the Constitution following the burglary and the theft, and could possibly face a full impeachment investigation by lawmakers. Let me go straight to the conclusion of the panel report. They stated there that accordingly, we are satisfied that the evidence discloses prima facie a violation of section 96 2A read with section 83B of the Constitution. In all the circumstances, we are satisfied that the President has a case to answer in relation to charge number 1. They say in all circumstances. I'm underlining that. And then the report from the panel then makes a recommendation. The summary of the recommendation is that in light of all the information placed before the panel, we conclude that this information discloses prima facie that the President may have committed 1, a serious violation of sections 96 2A. 2, a serious violation of section 34(1) of PRECA, that is the Prevention of Crime Act. 3, a serious misconduct in that the President violated section 96 2B by acting in a way that is inconsistent with his office. And lastly, 4, a serious misconduct in that the President violated section 96 2B by exposing himself to a situation involving a conflict between his official responsibilities and his private business of the Constitution. Now, that is as far as the report goes. It is clear, and this is my personal opinion. I must say, I'm not a legal expert. I'm a student of philosophy and politics. So my understanding is that this report goes beyond the individual. It goes beyond the party in parliament. It goes beyond any electoral committee of the ANC. It goes beyond any national conference of a party that is imminent or that is still playing. And it goes beyond the views of any national executive committee. So it deals with the president as a constitutional subject. In other words, like we had in the case of former President Jacob Zuma, Mogoeng says, besides being an individual, besides Jacob Zuma being equal like any other citizen in the country, because of the position that he occupies as president, he becomes a constitutional subject. in this recommendation, which is very, very, very strong, meaning that a serious violation of the constitution or the law of the country, I think it places before us as a nation, it's not an ANC matter, it's not an executive matter, but it places before the citizens of this country and says the president may have possibly violated the constitution. Now, we know what led to this inquiry or the report. Now, I think we're faced with these options. A motion of confidence, if we were to proceed that way, in terms of our constitution, if the National Assembly, by a vote supported by a majority of its members, passes a motion of no confidence in the president and the other members of the cabinet and any deputy minister must resign. So, my understanding is a very, very, very strong summation of where the panel has put us. I think it is really a call to the leadership of the African National Congress, its National Executive Committee, and the president himself to apply their minds in such a way that they are considering of what has happened to the country in the past 10 years, including the Zondo Commission and so on. And if they are sensitive to this, I think it's left in their hands to make the right decisions when they meet this evening. They may choose to go through the processes, the due processes. They may choose that maybe the president resigns. It's not up to us, but I think it's left up to them. But it does concern the nation. May I just add that the removal of a president in terms of the constitution, if we follow due process, it says anyone under section 89(2), anyone who has been removed from the office of the president in terms of subsection 1A or B may not receive any benefit of that office and may not serve in any public office. So maybe I must come to the end by concluding that in the previous instances, when former President Thabo Mbeki was recalled, he chose not to challenge. I think it was in the interest of the country. He had the choice, he had the option to refuse that recall, but he chose in the interest of the country to resign. The same, we know that former President Jacob Zuma, until the last end, we did not know which way he will go. But at the end, he also chose to resign rather than go through the process of impeachment. I think now this is occurring for the third time, and I may not say which way the president, influenced by his understanding of the implications and also by influence by the position that the National Executive Committee of the ANC will take, what decision he will finally take. May I end there? Thank you, Ivo.
Let me follow up straight away. What would be, in your view, the differences between the circumstances which led to the recall of Thabo Mbeki Jacob Zuma and the dilemma that faces Cyril Ramaphosa now? Are there any differences, especially in terms of the constitutional? It appears to me that we already emphasize the constitutional aspects with regard to Palapala. Whereas it appeared to me that with the ANC, with the Thabo Mbeki, it was an internal matter. Am I correct?
Yeah, let me just say, remember, before it reaches this level, it starts as an internal matter. All of them. Even Palapala started as an internal matter. I think there was an option for the president understanding the implications relating to the theft at his place to then diverge to whoever within the party and the party to take the correct decision. I think it was left until it is too late now. And from where I'm sitting, the same fate that befell former President Thabo Mbeki, former President Jacob Zuma, is the same here. At the end, it is Parliament. It is the National Assembly. His fate is in the hands of the National Assembly. And we know that the majority party is the African National Congress. I think for me, it was possible that this matter could have been handled within the ANC. Whether we would have the same outcome, I'm not sure. Yeah, that is from a layman's point of view, yes.
No, thanks. I'll come back to you. When I come back to you, I really want you to consider what has brought us to this stage in the east of the ANC, especially in post-apartheid South Africa, that we have a whole president faced with such a dilemma, the third president. What has happened? What has gone wrong in the ANC? Before that, I want to get some reflections. Tessa, are you available to reflect? What are your initial reactions to this big elephant in the room? Tessa?
Hi. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Tessa Dooms. My reflections on the Palapala issue are twofold. One is that we must look at this not through the lens of party politics, but through the lens of a head of state that has got a constitutional mandate to the country. I think most of the discussion about Palapala over the last few months has been about the ANC step-aside rule, whether it would apply, when would he be charged, and all of those are ANC party politics and technicalities, and we cannot as a country be held hostage by the whims of an ANC that we barely know and trust. And what we need to do is apply the law, and we must apply the constitution, and we must apply the president and every MP that can vote on an impeachment. We must apply the rule around their representation of us as the people. It is the people's parliament that gets to decide on impeachment, not Luthuli House. And so we've had the succession of recalls over our democracy and our democratic era because we have depended on the ANC in terms of Luthuli House to make those decisions, because we know that parliamentarians, whether they're in the ANC or in other parties, are not afraid of the public, they're not accountable to the public, and they don't consult the public on the way they should vote. And so what we have in this case that I think is very important is we had the panel. And the panel did something that we haven't seen in previous motions of no confidence and impeachment attempts, is they set forward arguments for why this is necessary. And our parliament has become a lame duck when it comes to debate in the House. Debate has not been robust. Debate has not been evidence-based. The closest we came to real evidence-based was the ad hoc committee on Nkandla. And even there, we saw the ANC ignore its own evidence that the ad hoc committee presented and decide the way they were going to vote is what Luthuli House said. This speaks to a crisis of a parliament that is unaccountable to the people, and it speaks to a crisis of being distracted by the ANC and being held hostage by party bosses and party politics, because we have an electoral system that does not see us as the voter in between elections.
So which way would it go now, Tess? You seem very...
The problem is it could go any way tonight. Tonight, the president could resign on the basis that he would rather resign without having gone to parliament and explained himself. And that in itself is not ideal, because it just means that people will resign rather than be accountable. But if he stays, we are going to have to, as a nation, ask the difficult questions. The president has, for the first time, submitted his full account of events to the panel, and it's now in the public domain. I would like to see the president do a PowerPoint slide explaining absolutely everything that's in that report and opening himself up to scrutiny, both in the media and parliament. That's the kind of president I want to see. I don't want to hear platitudes. I don't want to hear about processes. The president doesn't need to wait for processes to take the nation into his confidence. And tonight, we're either going to see a resignation, or we as a country are going to have to demand answers.
Okay, that's very strong. Phakaliwe, what's your view? Phakaliwe?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for having me on this platform. It really is a very interesting discussion that we're having today, especially in light of the recent revelations that we've been dealing with in the last 12 hours or so. I want to just latch on to the question that you asked, Comrade Ibo, regarding what went wrong with the ANC. I think that was the question that you asked, my brother, you asked. And the answer that NUMSA would give, NUMSA would say that the problem with the ANC is not what we've been told in the media, which is that the problem is Jacob Zuma and the RET faction versus, you know, CR17 faction. I think it's time that South Africans start to contend.
Your mic.
Phakaliwe, your mic. Your mic.
Gender.
It's probably a network issue.
Yeah, I think it's a network issue. It's not a mic.
Oh. Carry on, Phakaliwe.
That having
Network, huh? Let's move to Samkele in the meantime. Samkele, can you come in? What are you hearing?
pardon me.
Phakaliwe, I'll come back to you. Can you hear me, Phakaliwe? Phakaliwe.
Yes, she has disconnected.
Okay. Samkele Maseko, what are you hearing?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Essentially, essentially what's transpiring is that it's a marathon of meetings this time around, taking place in Cape Town, where the president is currently at his private residence on First Naya, and also in his official office in Parliament. He's had a marathon of meetings with the likes of Mondli Gungubele, who's the minister in the presidency, who's also one of his chief lobbyists. The likes of Enoch Godongwana are also next to him, and his other trusted lieutenants. What we do know is that initially he had said that he doesn't have a problem with resigning as the head of state, and ultimately come the 55th National Conference in December, bow out as the president of the African National Congress. It would make no sense for him to leave now, as we are just about 14 days away from the National Conference of the ANC. But what is seemingly taking place is that political machinations are in full swing going towards the 55th National Conference. Those whom are seemingly political nemesis of Ramaphosa, the RET faction, your Carl Niehaus, your Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zumas, your Tony Yengenis, your Thandi Mahambihlalas, the former faction belonging to former President Jacob Zuma has all come up together to say this man must go. But on the other hand, you've got a middle faction led by Paul Mashatile, who is the Treasurer General and the Acting Secretary General of the ANC, who is a strong contender with the highest number of branch nominations, sitting at about 1,780 to become the Deputy President of the ANC, who's lurking in the background and who's watching these two factions at war with one another, who is hoping to be the benefactor of whatever decision the ANC president may take, even if it is the decision to resign as head of state. I think him resigning is a bit too far-fetched at this point in time. It's still way too early for him to resign. What may transpire is that he may take a leave of absence as the president of the country and still remain as head of state, but have a caretaker president just for the interim whilst he's taking a leave of absence, and also remain as president of the ANC, which opens up the door for him to contest the 55th National Conference of the ANC, come back as ANC president, go through the necessary parliamentary processes. If he can see that the parliamentary process of impeachment is going to be bad on him, or if he will not legally win by taking the report of Section 89 on legal review, he may then decide to resign at a later stage before or after the 2024 national general elections. But if you think the ANC president or the president of the country may resign now and leave, I think it's not going to happen at this point in time, but he will give the nation something which is in line with the policies adopted by the ANC at the 54th National Conference to try and cleanse the organization of wrongdoing. Remember that letter he wrote about a year ago, where he said the ANC stands as accused number one, because you'd see that there are some reformists within the ANC who want to truly renew the ANC, who may say, Cyril Ramaphosa has erred, but if Cyril Ramaphosa goes, who are we left with? Are we left with Paul Mashatile, who's got a cloud hanging over his head over the Alexandra Renewal Project? Are we left with Didi Mabuza, who's got a number of unanswered issues when he was still the premier and the provincial chairperson of the ANC in Mpumalanga? Then there is the ultimate dark horse, which is the former General Secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers, and also the current Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy and National Chairperson of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, because historically, you've got to take these things in history. In 2017, Gwede Mantashe was muted to be Cyril's deputy. Mantashe said he's too old for that position. That position needs a younger person. This time around, he's been repeating and echoing the same sentiments, that the ANC needs a younger deputy president to take over should the president something happen to him. You've got a younger deputy president who's going to be able to compete with the likes of the EFF. Hence, you see the nominations of the likes of Ronald Ozilamula from Mpumalanga, the likes of Oscar Mabuyane in the Eastern Cape. So it essentially tells you that you've got the leadership of the ANC that is cognizant of the current political conjuncture that the ANC is in, that it's got an aging leadership which is pretty much detached from the general populace of South Africa and is trying to infuse younger leaders to come into the party. But the issue of Cyril Ramaphosa is an Achilles heel to the ANC, just like it was with Nkandla back in 2012, 2014 with the Gupta saga. But the ANC, when it is faced with issues and faced with troubles, particularly around their presence, they close ranks and they say one message, multiple voices. But in the current contemporary politics we are in, and the current epoch that the ANC is in, we are seeing an organization that is pretty much fragmented, which is two organizations in one. One perspective, which is a dominant faction, the ANC, NEC, may close ranks. One message, multiple voices. But on the other hand, you'll have another plethora of voices coming from the RET faction, which is seemingly aligned to former President Jacob Zuma. Then you are going to have this in the middle faction, which is led by spokes Shipokoso Mashatile, which will go wherever the wind blows, whichever they find favorable for them, in ultimately to have Paul Mashatile installed as the president of the Republic of South Africa. So in essence, the political machinations are in full swing. The president is applying his mind, but he has been told by his legal advisors that there may be a prospect of winning this issue of the Section 89 report in court, but he may also lose. On the virtue that the Section 89 panel, on its own admission, said that there were many aspects of the investigation and facts that were missing from all sectors of society whom presented their facts to the high panel report. And there were also a number of discrepancies and loopholes in the evidence that President Cyril Ramaphosa gave onto the Section 89 panel, particularly when it comes to the finances, the operations of Phala, and also abusing his office in roping in the Namibian police to investigate in a discreet manner this particular investigation. The NEC meeting is going to be highly politically charged when it sits tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. We already know those who want the president's head to roll and for him to fall on his sword, but his fight back plan has not yet been let out of the bag. You've only seen snippets of it from the likes of Zizi Godwa, Mondli Kungubele, Sibongile Pesani, the head of ANC presidency. But interestingly, one of the individuals implicated in this Phala saga, Bechane Chauke, the political advisor of President Ramaphosa, was also contesting to be the Treasurer General of the ANC, had a very interesting comment in the public domain today. Quote, "Challenging times reveal the actual characters of people. Do not be disappointed. Be happy that you were able to know who, what, and how they are. No retreat, exclamation mark," end of quote. That essentially tells you that some of his advisors are telling him that, Chief, gear yourself up for the fight of your life. And the National Executive Committee that will sit tomorrow will be the biggest test of Cyril Ramaphosa's reign and proximity and leadership and also power within the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And ultimately, that test will reach its climax at the 55th National Conference.
But Maseko, Mbatha said that this goes beyond the ANC. It's now in the national domain, that it is the National Assembly which will decide. Are you saying that what happens in the ANC, including the fight back which you are predicting, can in fact preempt what the National Assembly might decide to do?
Ultimately, whatever the ANC National Executive Committee decides, when it is still the dominant and the most powerful and the leading political formation in the country and has majority seats within the National Assembly, what the NEC decides will ultimately happen within the National Assembly. And particularly with this investigation, how they vote in the various ad hoc committees, the impeachment process, how they vote ultimately to adopt or to disregard this particular report will be influenced by the decisions taken by the National Executive Committee of the ANC, because the ANC caucus takes its mandate from Luthuli House, and Luthuli House gets its mandate from the National Executive Committee of the ANC, which the National Working Committee with the SGO then has to implement with the chief whip of ANC in the caucus, which is Phakaliwe Majola. So whatever that caucus of the 241 or so members of parliament that the ANC have, that decision will be taken by Luthuli House. They will then go and be informed by the Treasurer General, the SG, the Deputy President of the ANC, just like it was with former President Jacob Zuma. You remember when they were recalling former President Jacob Zuma, it was Paul Mashatile and Gwede Mantashe who went to address the ANC caucus that the party had taken a decision to recall former President Jacob Zuma. If he did not resign, then the ANC would vote with other opposition parties to remove the former president. So ultimately, the buck stops at Luthuli House and nowhere else. But with what Mr. Khulu Mbatha is saying, ultimately the decision will be taken in the National Assembly, but influenced by the decisions taken at Luthuli House. Those in the National Assemblies who are members of parliament will just vote, raise their hands. They're just voting cattle there. They will do whatever Luthuli House tells them to do, unless if they decide to vote with their conscience. And that happens in all parties within South Africa. You go to the economic freedom fighters, what Julius Malema says goes. We go to the Democratic Alliance, When the leadership of the DA in the FedEx has decided, they vote along party lines. There is no issue in South Africa as a free agent of a member of parliament. They all vote along party lines.
Phakaliwe, do you agree with that? Phakaliwe?
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we have to accept as South Africans that we are in for more of this silly circus, unless we take a decisive decision to start to imagine a future without the government. And that is precisely what NUMSA has been driving, particularly since 2013, when it went to and adopted its special resolution to basically call on COSATU to break away from the alliance. Because even though NUMSA had been part of the ANC alliance from its formation, effectively as a trade union, working alongside the ANC in order to advance its policies. In 2013, the trade union had to reckon with itself about how successful this arrangement was, because the ANC government, even up until that point, had demonstrated that it was not a party driving an agenda for the improvement of lives for the majority of people. It was a political party that was driving an agenda for the benefit of factions of capital. And when you look at what has been happening in South Africa, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, in the battle between President Zuma and his faction versus the battle against Ramaphosa. Before this, it was Zuma versus Comrade Mbeki, if you remember. And at the end of the day, we've just been subjected to factional battles of the ANC and no real transformation in the ordinary lives of the majority of people. And until we as a nation start to accept that this vehicle called the African National Congress, that we vote into power over and over again, is not a political formation that is interested in our collective development as a country, until we start to accept that reality, we are going to continue to go on this perpetual seesaw where we are misled by pundits and analysts and media houses about which leader of the ANC is better than the other. NUMSA has adopted a very clear position in that the only leader that is good for the working class, or the only political formation that is good for the working class in South Africa today, is a political formation that is very, very clear about its agenda. And if that agenda is about advancing the interests of the majority of people. Everything about what the ANC has done in the last 28 years has been to entrench the power of the elite, of the minority. 28 years of ANC rule has created the most unequal society in the world. So that's not going to change until we make a radical decision about the politics and the framework and the governance of this party.
Phakaliwe, just a clarification. Who withdrew from the alliance in 2013? Was it NUMSA? Was it COSATU? Was it both?
So NUMSA resolved in 2013 that COSATU should withdraw from the alliance. As a result of taking that resolution, because NUMSA had not just resolved that COSATU should reject the alliance, NUMSA had also resolved to stop supporting the ANC during elections, because they'd come to the conclusion that the working class was just being abused, really. The alliance was literally revived every 5 years for elections, and the recommendations and the demands of the working class for genuine transformation were being ignored. So it was amongst those resolutions, a resolution to push COSATU to reject the ANC, plus the decision taken by NUMSA not to support the ANC and Zuma in the next round of elections, that subsequently led to NUMSA being expelled from COSATU in 2014. And since then, NUMSA has really walked a path on its own away from the alliance. It has been driving its own resolutions. For example, one of the resolutions that it had adopted was that the trade union must form a united front which will basically drive a sort of a political agenda and raise the awareness amongst members of the working class that, you know, if they can unite and start to focus on their own demands, they can actually drive the politics in the direction that they want. And they went further by even establishing a political party called the SRWP. And that was because the trade union recognizes that if a political formation is not clear about advancing a working class agenda, it means the working class will be left behind. And the ANC has been pandering to neoliberalism, to capitalism, and we're suffering as a result of that. Our economy has not transformed at all in the way that we expected when we were fighting against the apartheid system. The majority of people in this country continue to suffer the way they did pre-apartheid. So I'm quite mindful of what Samkele is saying when he talks about Ramaphosa's fight back strategy. It's very clear from what he's saying that for the next couple of weeks, South Africans are going to be plunged into this battle where we're going to be forced to take sides between Ramaphosa and somebody else, I suppose Dr. Mzweli Mkhize. But until we recognize that you are replacing one devil with another devil in the form of the ANC, we can never expect genuine radical transformation of our lives as the majority working class.
I hear you very well, Phakaliwe, but I want to be clear. It's NUMSA which came out of the alliance, not COSATU.
Yes, it was NUMSA.
Okay. So the unions, the working class is divided.
Yes, it is, which is part of the challenge.
Wouldn't you argue then that therefore that the unions, the working class movement, is so to speak weaker now vis-a-vis the ANC, vis-a-vis the government?
We are definitely weaker because we are not united, because we don't have a common agenda through which all of us can sort of get behind. You have half of the unions still within COSATU, and as long as they're within COSATU, it means they support the ANC and the alliance. And then you have the remainder either within SAFTU or on their own, you know. And this is part of the challenge, because if you recall, during the dark days of apartheid, part of the power of the liberation movement was that all the unions, certainly the progressive unions, were under one banner, which was COSATU as a federation. And it was through the unity of COSATU that we were able to put serious pressure, not just here in South Africa through strike actions that were taking place in workplaces all over the country, but also through campaigns that were launched all over the world in order to topple apartheid. So the fragmentation of the labor movement in South Africa is a very, very big problem, because it prevents workers and the working class, who are the majority, from defining a clear agenda for themselves so that they can drive a program of action in order to better their own lives.
But Phakaliwe, people would argue that the ANC remains the focal point, the eye of the storm, as long as the apartheid era hangs over the post-apartheid era, that you cannot ignore the ANC as a main force around which popular forces, including the unions, should coalesce. Would you agree?
The problem with that line of thinking is that it means that unions and the working class must just fall in line with whatever agenda the ANC government is driving. Right now, the ANC government is driving a hardcore privatization agenda. There's a wholesale selling of our state-owned entities to those who are politically aligned to the governing party. The sale of these state-owned entities is not benefiting us at all as ordinary workers. It's not benefiting us certainly as the public. We can just use SAA as an example. More than 3,000 workers lost their jobs through the process of SAA being restructured. We are now told that SAA was sold for a penny, 51 Rand, to a consortium whose members are politically connected to the governing party. And this we can expect to see across state-owned entities. The bulk, for example, of the renewable energy independent power producers, which is the ANC government's response to renewable energy, the bulk of the bids which were awarded in the last round, 12 out of the 25 bids were awarded to Patrice Motsepe, who is related to President Ramaphosa through marriage. This is the ANC of today. This is the governing party of today. It is a party that is not interested in using SOEs to advance an agenda for the working class, to build up the economy, to build up industries and sectors. SAA, for example, at its heyday, contributed 23,000 jobs to the value chain. There's not a single private airline that can compare to SAA in terms of what it did for developing our economy. And that's the role of SOEs, is to industrialize, to create sectors, to assist a developing country to grow. But our government is not interested in that. Our politicians are enriching themselves at our expense, as they are doing through privatization. And this is why we're saying that it is true that our weakness as labor is that we're not united, because this disunity is preventing us from fighting for what truly matters, which is that this government must drive an agenda for genuine transformation for the majority of people. And that can only be done if we unite and put pressure on them in that way.
So you're looking for an alternative to the ANC, are you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The alternative is socialism.
Socialism through what? Through which?
Can we come in? Can we come back?
Which agency? Through a party? Through
Comrade Ivo, I don't think it's fair. Comrade Ivo, can
Yes.
you hear?
Yes,
Yeah,
come in.
I don't think it's fair. I think we must come back to why we're having this discussion today. We're not meeting essentially because there is a crisis among the working class. And I fully agree with what Phakaliwe has said. I think let's come back.
Let's come back to what she's saying basically is that things are not well in the ANC, that the ANC
No,
may have
it's a political discussion. The ANC is a political organization.
Yeah.
We are in this crisis. Let us start by saying, let me start by saying what Samkele has been telling us, which I think it's relevant. It is relevant in as far as knowing what factions we have in the ANC. But I don't worry about who will be the next president of the ANC, as long as the politics, the vision, the mission of the political organization to which the masses of our organization are looking up to. What plans do they have? What mission? Let me remind you that the president comes into office, and when he takes an oath, it is to promote that which will advance and to oppose all that may harm the republic, to obey, observe, uphold, and maintain the constitution and all other law of the republic. And lastly, he takes the oath because the president is committed to devote himself to the well-being of the republic and all its people. That is essential. So
now we hear that. When go back to the main issue. What is the vision of the ANC, if any?
No. That's why. That's why we have this crisis. We have this crisis because the ANC has gone off-road, off-track, because of the interest of the people who are leading the ANC today. I don't think they have the interest of the masses. Remember, they come to power promising promising to deliver services to the masses of our people, not to the ANC, to the masses, to the citizens.
So what went wrong, Khulu? What went wrong? What went wrong? We are now 28 years since the end of the party. What went wrong? You were inside, you're an insider. What went wrong? Tell us.
No, but the president himself said it. He said, accused number one in terms of corruption, in terms of arrogance, in terms of everything that is venal, it is the ANC. And the president, when he took over as president of the country with a new dawn, he promised to do exactly that, to fight corruption, to bring renewal into the organization, to bring openness. But I think he has failed. He has failed mainly because he himself did not adhere to the promises he made to the nation. But I think we must also hold the whole leadership of the ANC that they have not acted. They have not acted in the interest of the majority of our people. And may I just end up by saying, by quoting Comrade Ahmed Katrada, who said, perhaps, and I quote, the most critical failure has been the inability to create an economy that is inclusive of all, one that could have been more equal than it is now. The inequality in our society is something that we did not fully prepare for, and we now know that we have to deal with its consequences. So this is a political agenda which is now absent. We are going to the 55th conference. Let me just say this. We are going to the 55th conference when former President Thabo Mbeki has said there are no plans to address inequality in the economy of this country. We are going to a 55th conference when a national executive member, Mukonyane, said this is the weakest NEC of the ANC to ever lead government. So this is the crisis. This is a political crisis. Of course, we are drawn into legal aspect.
No, because we want to get away from the legal. We want to come back to the heart of the matter.
Yes.
Don't you think many of you in the ANC, including Thabo Mbeki, project a romantic notion as to what the ANC used to be? But now you are judging the current ANC and all that has gone wrong against a false or even a mythical standard. The assumption that there were certain principles, clear principles in terms of, and ideology in terms of what is expected in post-apartheid. Don't you agree there's a myth that the ANC was ever organized, ever clear ideologically?
No, let me, the mission of the ANC has always remained the same from its founding. The mission was to liberate South Africans from national oppression and emancipate the majority of its working class from exploitation, and then create a society where all people are equal, and including all the minorities. Today, the ANC has become a black organization in leadership and in thinking. The ANC has not been deliberate in addressing the composite, the full aspect of what national liberation is. But again, we must say, because from a scientific point of view, we have said the ANC has failed to adapt, especially after 1994. After coming into power, the ANC failed to adapt, to understand that it is now responsible, not to the ANC members. The ANC should be responsible to all its citizens, black and white, Indian and colored. The ANC
Khulu, I put it to you very simply.
Yes.
The ANC is no different from all other nationalist movements whose mission, whose vision was simply to take over from the whites. Isn't that the reality?
Agree.
And that is,
No.
And you are failing to accept the reality? That is the reality.
No,
And
I agree, but the ANC was never limited to that. It never limited itself. But I am aware that the people who were the leaders of the organization, they are no longer there. We must agree that this ANC of today is not the ANC of Mandela, of the Sisulu's, and so on. This ANC itself has undergone changes, and these changes are objective. They are not only subjective, because coming into power and controlling such a complex economy, this economy has also had an impact in the thinking of our people.
Mr. Mbatha, no,
Yes.
sorry to just butt in there.
If
you are referencing the ANC of Nelson Mandela, and you are going back yesterday to the founders of the Youth League who ultimately changed the course of history of the ANC, I would say to you, you go to the ANC when it was in exile. You go to the allegations which prompted the Hani Memorandum, which prompted the Morogoro Conference. It tells you that the ANC in different epochs has gone through various stages of decline, of allegations of corruption, of nepotism, and that issue of the ANC's cadership being divorced of political clarity and political ideology started when you go back to that Morogoro watershed conference of the Chris Memorandum, and you go to the various epochs. You go to the era of former President Jacob Zuma, where a vast majority of ANC members were depoliticized, and you just oppose it to history. You go to the Kwabe conference, you go to the era of James Morocco and Z.R. Mahabane. It tells you that historically, the ANC, which former President Mbeki reminisces about, is a flawed conception of the African National Congress. It's like saying ZANU-PF comrades, reminiscing of the days of the era of when ZANU was still being formed, led by Robert Gabriel Mugabe. And it's a facade. It's a reminiscence of a history totally devoid of the true reflection of the various epochs of the African National Congress. The reality and the truth of the matter is the ANC has failed to transform from a nationalist or to transform from a liberation movement into a modern day political party. They still operate as if
we are saying the same thing. We are saying the same thing, Samkele.
Right.
We are saying the same thing.
But let's just move from that. I think we need to accept the quotation at the head of the concept note refers my quotation, Khulu, which seeks to describe what we really are as former liberation movements, right? We're essentially a nationalist movement. The era of the Mandelas and Sisulus was nationalist.
I agree.
Now, one of the arguments which is poignant, I mean, people like Mole Simbeki written on this, and even yourself, is the failure to deliver in terms of technocratic intervention to deliver, right? Well, we are seeing now the decline of public enterprises. Phakaliwe complains about the sale of SOEs. But more important example that in Mole Simbeki's paper is a complete decline of the railway system. You know, what has already happened in Zimbabwe? In Zimbabwe, all the public service systems, parastatals have collapsed. And it's sad to see the same thing is happening in South Africa. And for the same reasons, which is the lack of attention to detail, lack of attention to the deployment of skills, lack of attention to a policy framework which seeks to move forward. How do you think we can inject that into as we go forward?
We agree to that, but before I go on, I think Tessa has raised her hand for some.
Tessa, come in, please. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the hand, but Tessa, please come in. Tessa, I want also to remind you your statement you made reference to the need for this pala thing to be put in the public domain, that the president should address the nation, explain to the nation in detail. In other words, I thought your intervention was very novel, was you are asking that the president must account to the people of South Africa, not just to the ANC or the National Assembly, but to the people of South Africa. How do you think you should do that? Tessa?
I don't want to belabor that point.
Yes.
I don't want to belabor that point, but to reiterate it. The mechanisms to do that are very clear. It's called accounting to Parliament. Parliament is that place where the president must account from. Opening himself up further to scrutiny in the media would be an additional bonus, because our democracy requires that he is willing and available to be accountable to society at large. But I wanted to intervene by saying that I think conversations about how we got here, and particularly how the ANC got to where it is, don't take us forward much. For me, what is necessary, perhaps from those conversations, is for the future. So if I had to think about lessons from not decision and how we years. I'm a former UDF activist earlier this year, and the conversation was about how the UDF and UDF activists, some who were ANC, some who were not even particularly politically aligned, felt at the moment of the 94 transition that their comrades were now of the liberation struggle were now in power, and then handed over their power through the vote to political establishment, and in certain ways handed over their own agency and their own political ability to mobilize to, and it accounts for a lot of active civics and active political engagement from civil society. It accounts for the ways in which protest has become one of the singular voices of people's participation, because it's about resistance and trying to be heard by the political establishment. But we have not gotten to a point where we've matured our political voices outside of institutional politics. And one of the strengths of the liberation movement was that because institutional politics was difficult to hold, people found ways to politically organize that were innovative, that were organic, that didn't require sanction, to an era and gotten into a political culture where we look for somebody to legitimize our voice before we can express it. We look to first find the appropriate structure, the appropriate regulation, the appropriate electoral system, rather than really turning to ourselves as the people of the country and asking ourselves, what should co-governance look like now and into the future? Why is it that we're trapped and we're at the behest of political parties? How do we start to change the way we relate to both the elections and what happens in between elections as the people of the country, assuming we choose not to affiliate? Because the reality of our country is this, that the vast majority of voting age people are not in political parties and do not care about the conversations that are happening within the Tuli House. They genuinely just don't. We've gotten to a point where only 30% of eligible voters showed up in 2021, because if you include people who have never registered, the number of 45% turnout actually is about 30% turnout. People are walking away from politics in their numbers. We're walking away from not only politics in terms of party politics, but we're walking away from the democratic project. And that is what should concern us the most. The fact that the ways in which party politics has dominated political space and sapped out of communities, stepped out of civil society, stepped out even of business, political voices, is a crisis. And I want to talk about what that looks like going into the future.
Please do.
I want to talk about what the future needs of us to do. The first thing the future needs of us to do is to have a reality check that the ANC being at the center of our politics is fast becoming a thing of the past. And we need to actually have a conversation with the country about how we prepare for that eventuality. How do we prepare for an eventuality where the ANC goes below 50%? How do we think about what that means for not only coalitions forming, but what does it mean for how MPs will vote? How does it mean for how the public can engage with Parliament, with MPLs? What does it mean for understanding what's happening within the factional battles of the ANC? It means very little. What does it mean for the fact that there may be a power vacuum that we cannot afford as a nation? We must start having that critical conversation. The second thing we must talk about in light of the ANC's looming lack of dominance of the political terrain is what happens if the ANC stares down the barrel in 2024 and decides that it's not going down without a fight? What happens if the ANC decides that it is going to rather cause chaos and ungovernable society rather than lose power silently? We would like to believe that that's not the case. But what if that happens? We must start having open conversations about those potentialities. What happens if the ANC or any party tries to manipulate our electoral system in 2024 beyond and our electoral process? Those are the things we must concern ourselves with if we think about the very immediate future. Things about coalitions are a real thing. They are a real dynamic. They're a real thing we need to think about. Not because we're fixated on the big three parties, but because we believe that the system hold for that, and we haven't created an electoral system, particularly at national and provincial level, that actually accounts for what we do in the face of a coalition. Whereas other countries in the world has legislation for that. We don't need to change the constitution. We just need a functional legislation that is pushed in the direction of coming up with something that makes coalitions work. But the most important thing for us to do into the future is for us to start imagining and enacting new politics. So what do I mean by new politics? I mean, number one, a politics that imagines the ability to politically contest outside of party politics. We need to reinvest in our society the idea of civics, civic conversations, engaging each other on our thoughts politically as a society, regardless of party colors. We need to think about how we start to have conversations around what solidarity looks like, around what equality looks like, around what justice looks like, outside of what parties say to us. The second thing we need to do is consider what direct action looks like as communities again, because we have limited ourselves to resistance politics and protest. And I'd hope that we can start to increase the menu of what our direct action looks like to actual accountability, to actually being able to say that we are going to set the agenda and set the tone, that we are going to insist on participation when it comes to budget processes, whether they're national, provincial, or local, that we are going to insist on knowing who our members of parliament are and holding them accountable, that we are going to insist on starting to look for solutions in our own communities and starting to ask government where the budgets are so that we can do the things in our communities we know how to do. We can no longer just be okay with resistance politics in this country. We must get into solutions politics, and we must do it with absolute urgency. And the final thing is we must talk about electoral politics and how we re-engage the majority of people back into it. Because we must remember that if only 5 people show up in 2024, those 5 people will determine our fate, whether or not we like the options on the ballot. It's not about whether we like the options on the ballot. It's about the fact that we will lose our voice to other people. And in the case that we find ourselves, we have decided that politics is for the worst amongst us. We've decided we're too good for politics. We don't want our reputations damaged by saying we're political. We have to change that entirely, and we have to decide that we are willing to find the best amongst us put the best amongst us on the ballot, put the issues we care about on the ballot, and then vote for the best amongst us and hold them accountable. We mustn't do this waiting for some sort of political savior to come. We must start it with conversations in our communities, in our homes, in our families, in our workplaces, in our businesses, and we must all encourage each other to re-engage and recommit to a collective politics, to a politics outside of what parties dictate to us, and to a politics that says we set the political agenda, not some political party in the Julie House.
That's a very powerful statement, Tessa. No, hold on,
Okay.
Khulu. That's a very powerful statement, Tessa, but in the world, the real world, really, you can hardly do anything outside party politics, as you can see, because basically for every solution, for every goal, for every vision, there is need for agency. And I'm not sure that the NGOs, the civic society that you talk about so strongly, has a capacity to create a critical mass through which to push an alternative agenda. And I think, how do you think you could do that without being without a political party? And secondly, before I turn to Khulu, who's trying to intervene, what would the coalition look like? Everyone is talking about a coalition. Do you think proportional representation is naturally given to a coalition in South Africa?
So two things. One is, I'll deal with the latter first. A coalition can happen with proportional representation or with a mixed system with direct and proportionality. That is entirely possible. The point is that you need legislation and you need regulations that help set the terms for how coalition agreements are crafted and how they are managed. Right now, at local government level, parties have 14 days to come up with coalition agreements. And then we wonder why the coalition agreements are flimsy and are about very superficial horse trading. We need to give ourselves much better room, space, and conditions for the forming of coalitions. We must also require of political parties in the way in we set those regulations to focus on certain goals and aspirations that they set and agendas that they set. We must think about the timeframes in which coalition agreements can be changed. There are many things we can do to create stable coalitions, whether we have a PR system only or whether we have a direct system and PR system, which I think is necessitated by the introduction of independent candidates anyway. But I think also the constituency-based approach, because again, whether you have PR system on its own or whether you have a split system, we need to get to a system where people who are elected have to account to someone other than their party. And we've seen it across the world where you can be in a party and have a party, but still have to represent a community of people. It's not diametrically opposed. But right now we're holding on to a system where the only person that an MP needs to account to is their political party. That needs to go. The reason why the political parties are fighting so hard against the electoral amendment bill is because they do not want to have to account to actual communities. So there's a way to do that work. But to your first question around NGOs, civil society, all of that, and whether or not there's sufficient will and agency, we must not limit our imaginations, number one, to big NGOs as needing to hold all of this together. That's not where the power in this country lies. To be honest, communities of people in everyday spaces are holding their communities together by community action. If you think about what's happened in Makanda, Makanda is a great example of how a community pulls together and got 30% of a vote in a local government election because they decided that they were going to put issues on the table and they were going to work across different sectors of their society that was not only NGOs. It included business, it included white people, it included Black people, it included impoverished people, it included the unemployed people's movement. We are going to have difficult conversations with each other as society in order to find the minimal viable things that we are willing to coalesce around. And those things are not individuals, they're not people, they are issues. The things that are most likely to bind us are the issues that we care about. One of the reasons why I'm so opposed to the privatization of Eskom and us moving towards just privatizing our electricity in wholesale. It's because one of the things that is holding us in some form of solidarity is the fact that we have one grid. And so even if people can buy their way off the grid at this point, the number of those people are limited at this point. And so we have a sense of we need to fix this thing for everybody. We've lost that in so many spaces in our country. We've lost that when it comes to health. We've lost that when it comes to education. We've lost it on many things. We need a radical solidarity in this country where people can come from different points of view and we can find the minimum things that we can have solidarity around. And I don't think that's asking too much. It just requires us to break our imaginations about who are the actors that matter the most.
Thanks, Tessa. I'll come back to you. But we are about to lose Phakaliwe and Maseko. So I want to come to Phakaliwe first. What's the way forward, Phakaliwe, out of this?
I apologize, my lighting is very poor because of load shedding.
You know, right now we have 49% of the South African population who are either employed, unemployed, or underemployed. 49% of economically active people.
Yeah.
We have a situation where South Africa has lost its preeminence as the biggest economy in Africa. It's probably the third economy after Nigeria and Egypt, and it's going down. What can be done to lift South Africa out of this malaise, with this slide, gradual slide, into, someone was saying that South Africa is becoming like Zimbabwe. And someone was joking the other day that Zimbabwe will have to put up a wall at the Limpopo to stop South Africans coming up north. That's how cynical the comments are in South Africa. And yet, as I said at the beginning, we can't afford a South African shambles, the region, Africa as a whole. What should be done before your parting shot?
Well, I think for us as NUMSA, we're very clear that what needs to be done is we need to implement the promises that were made to workers and their families during the liberation movement. Back then, the demands were encapsulated in the Freedom Charter, which the ANC government has abandoned. The reality is that the burning question affecting the majority of people, workers and their families in South Africa, is inequality, joblessness, and poverty. Now, if we are going to talk about coalitions, these coalitions better not be coalitions of right-wing organizations driving a right-wing neoliberal agenda, which was what we've had for the last 28 years. We need to start getting real about the economic framework that we are relying on as a country in order to develop ourselves. And I've noticed there seems to be a high level of allergy in relation to talking about socialism and socialist policies and how they can be used to advance and improve our society. This week is a week where many of us were reminded about the most famous communist in South Africa, Comrade Chris Hani, who was murdered and his killer was paroled this week. And Chris Hani was not murdered because he was an individual. He was murdered because of his ideas, because he believed in the genuine emancipation of the majority of people, and that the only way that they could become truly free and actually experience genuine equality was to abolish the system that benefits and allows the markets to run rampant, as they have been in South Africa for the last 28 years. Those are the discussions we must be having about how do we transform the lives of ordinary people who have been fighting for real changes since the dark days of apartheid. And if we're going to continue to mislead ourselves that ideology doesn't matter and it should just be about coalitions without actually analyzing what is the ideology of all of these organizations. There are many, many political organizations in South Africa today. Majority of them are driving this neoliberal framework, which does not work and will not work. And it is time that we actually start to be brave and have courage and to do what other progressive nations have done, nationalize the land, nationalize the minerals for the benefit of the majority of people, so that we can fund the kind of economic changes we need to see to improve the lives of the majority of people. That is the position of NUMSA. That is what needs to happen today. We cannot continue to play around with neoliberalism. It has failed and it will continue to fail. We need a government that drives the agenda of the masses. And that's my parting shot. Thank you.
Thanks, Phakaliwe, and thanks for coming on this platform. Thank you. Samkele, Moletsi, I'll come back to you because Samkele is about to leave. Samkele, what are the likely developments the next week up to the national conference? What are the likely developments and beyond? What is the future?
What's most likely to transpire now? We've just heard that the president is no longer going to be addressing the nation tonight, which essentially means that Mondli Kungubele, his generals have gotten through to him and saying that you can't just leave, you've got to put up a fight. It essentially means he's taking the battle to the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, which starts tomorrow afternoon, which essentially takes back the ANC to the era of former President Jacob Zuma in those now and again, often NEC meetings, you would find him fighting for his political future within the National Executive Committee of the ANC. So he's no longer addressing the nation, which is a scenario of two things. If he's decided to resign or to take a leave of absence, he first has to tell the NEC, which effectively deployed him as, or the party which effectively deployed him as the president of the republic, instead of just going on air and resigning as head of state or taking a leave of absence before taking the NEC into confidence or briefing the NEC or the matter being deliberated by the NEC. Or it could be a scenario where he's saying, well, let's take it to the branches, let's take it to the battle zone of the National Executive Committee of the ANC and ultimately the 55th National Conference. If I win, come back as the ANC president, then they could rectify the issue of this head of the president of the ANC also being the presidential candidate of the ANC or being the head of state, where it's an issue that former President Mbeki and Oscar Mabuyane out in the Eastern Cape, Zamani Sol in the Northern Cape have been raising, that you've got to de-link the position of chairperson, position of president, to that of president of the country or premier, and that you've got to have a scenario where you have a president of the ANC situated at Luthuli House. So it essentially means that he's been given an array of options and he has ultimately chosen to take the battle to his political detractors instead of taking a way that may be seen by some of being weak and choosing to walk away, but also those whom are reformists in the ANC who want to renew the party may perceive this as Cyril Ramaphosa essentially going back on the promise to renew the party, to cleanse the party, and to do the right thing. There's a lot of political machinations now taking place. People are looking at securing their own self-preservation within positions in the ministries, but it essentially means he's not addressing the nation. The battle now shifts to the National Executive Committee of the ANC, which may end up not being a one-day NEC. It may end up being a two-day or an entire weekend National Executive Committee, because there are 80 people within that National Executive Committee. They are ex-officio members of that NEC, which are provincial secretaries and provincial chairpersons and leagues, presidents and secretaries of leagues or coordinators or conveners of leagues, which means that you cannot squeeze all of those people to speak in one day and only give them 5 minutes or 4 minutes. It may end up being a long weekend meeting where ultimately Cyril Ramaphosa is fighting for his political future. So he's no longer addressing the nation. The battle shifts to the National Executive Committee. If he wins the NEC, the battle ultimately goes to the 55th National Conference.
Thanks. You are leaving now, are you, Samkele?
Yes, I'm about to leave now, but essentially on the issue of moving the country forward.
Well, hold on, Moletsi. Carry on, Samkele.
On the issue of moving the country, forward.
Moses is up there. Come up. Tell the drive.
Carry on, Samkele.
On the issue of taking the country forward on coalitions, it essentially means.
But he's going to look after the car.
Coalition governments.
Sorry, Samkele, there's interference. Carry on, get your point.
The issue of coalition governments is a very interesting point, particularly when you look at how those whom are so-called leftist organization or broad churches like the ANC, your EFF, your IFP, and all these other smaller parties which have the same political inclination as the ANC, they are not finding one another, particularly when you look at what happened in Ekurhuleni, where the ANC and the EFF failed to vote together. You look at how the EFF then retaliated and refused to vote with the ANC in Johannesburg. And historically, the ANC and the EFF have never voted together unless if it is in the mutual interest of the economic freedom fighters. I don't see these parties agreeing anytime soon, particularly with the ANC facing this ideological warfare between the two parties, between the two factions, which has basically reached an irreconcilable point. Those who believe in radical economic transformation, radical policies such as the EFF, and those whom as conservatives within the ANC, your Cyril Ramaphosa, and the faction that he specifically leads, your likes of Thabo Mbeki, you don't see them aligning themselves with a rowdy crowd like the EFF.
Okay, for the issue of coalition, we're still very far from an easy access to coalitions. Let me come bring Moletsi Mbeki. The discussion is now open to the floor. Moletsi Mbeki, please come in and join in the debate. Moletsi.
Yeah, hello. Ibo, thanks for organizing this webinar.
There's an interference.
Hold on, the interference is from my cell phone.
Okay, all right.
Let me try and find a way of shutting it up.
All of them, Moletsi, all the phones.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better. Much better.
No. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Carry on. Moletsi, carry on. Moletsi.
Oh boy.
Carry on. We can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you. Moletsi. Moletsi.
Sorry.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
I think it's because it does not hear us.
Moletsi, get your technology together. Moletsi. Khulu, come in the meantime.
Yeah, let me come in. First,
Yeah.
let me start by saying the ANC as the oldest liberation movement, nationalist movement in Africa, has been relevant to the history of South Africa and the continent.
Hello.
How it remains relevant will depend on whether the ANC does adapt to the changes that have taken place globally and also in South Africa.
Oh, hi. Can you can hear me?
Moletsi, I'll come back to you just now. Khulu is on the line. Khulu is holding the floor. I'll come back to you.
So I fully agree with what Tessa explained. The country, because of the changes that have taken place, the advantages that are a fruit of our own struggles, the liberation of South Africa, the new constitution and the democracy that we live in. If the ANC adapts, it can make itself relevant for all the time. But if it doesn't, the citizens of this country and most aspects, politically and otherwise, have changed. The citizens have moved forward. They no longer look at the ANC for their survival. And it is true what was said, that South Africa has undergone a lot of changes. So what are these changes? It means that for what we agreed to achieve in 94, now realizing that it has not been achieved, we need to think differently from the way we used to think. We must not always think that, no, if the ANC is not relevant, then nothing will happen. No, 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 no. Society has changed. It does mean that we need to ignite our political agency. We need that we reorganize civil society the way we should, the way we did in the struggle against apartheid. But we were fighting against. Now we must fight for something to strengthen our democracy. And it does mean that things like the electoral system in this country, we have to address that, because as long as we have an electoral system that favors a particular party, we cannot move forward. As we said, in preparation for the 55th National Conference of the ANC, those comrades there, they have a challenge. They have to see, they have to address issues like, if they continue electing leadership the way the ANC does now, it means there won't be progress on that front. But as a civil society, we need to bring in labor force, we need to bring in business people to think, how can we save South Africa and develop it in the interest of the majority of our citizens? So changes have taken place and they'll continue to take place, because 1994 democracy was a real change, which meant that people are now advantaged to speak and to engage in a free society. So we can never, never be held to ransom by one party. Thank you.
No, thanks, Khulu. Moletsi, I hope you're ready now. Moletsi? And others, put up your hands if you want to come in. We have 20 minutes of discussion. Moletsi?
Okay, can you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just carry on. I don't know what it is.
Yes, unfortunately, I've been listening to you folks on the cell phone in my car for the past nearly 2 hours. So now that's probably what's causing the echo. Anyhow, Ibo made an important point which has not been followed, which is that we all have an idealized view of liberation movements. What liberation movements stand for, what they fought for, and what they are doing now once they got into government. Look, in my view, and when I look at my own family, you get a very clear picture. Liberation movements, which are the modern Christian organizations, these are very different from the indigenous African movements of the aristocracy. The Christian liberation movements fought to be included in the colonial system, not to oppose the colonial system. And this is what has happened to them eventually. And so we thought that because of the racism and the exclusion and the fact that it ended up in an armed struggle, that we were fighting for something different. When I take my own family, as far back as the war in 1850s in South Africa, my ancestors fought on the side of the British Army against the Xhosa people as part of the colonial army, in return for which we got Lovedale High School, we became Christians, we got 40 universities from the British and the missionaries, and I even had a scholarship from the British government. And so that's what the liberation movements were fighting for. They have now been incorporated into the colonial system, and they are running the colonial system. And we fail to recognize that that's what they wanted to do. That's what they are doing. Now, for the rest of the people in Southern Africa in particular, where we had white settler colonialism, the people have to choose for themselves, not be guided by liberation movements, because the liberation movements have a vested interest in retaining the colonial socio-economic system that we have amongst ourselves, that we have today in Southern Africa. The fact that these parties fight amongst themselves, we should not mistake that for a different choice. It's disagreements amongst the elite, not about changing the system, about who gets what out of the existing system. So I think this is the point that has been lost in this long discussion, is what were liberation movements fighting for. Thank you, Ibo.
Thanks, Moletti. I'll take London Command Headquarters, whoever that is. Identify yourself, then Tony Rila, and then William Mpofu. London Command Headquarters, who's that? Please identify yourself. If you are real.
Yes, I'm real. Doc, you can see, let me take off the glasses so that you can see me. I am your old friend, Dr. David Matanga, the Pan-African from East Africa. But yes, Shikamo. Habari yako mzee, miaka mingi.
Nzuri sana, karibu bwana.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my contribution today is to listen. But when you listen and don't talk, as an elder in Africa, at my age, it will be very sad. I think the direction South Africa is taking is not a very good direction. We thought Africa was going to take it as an example, but we seem to have lost our direction. There is no president, apart from Mandela, who finished their term in office. What's the problem here? What's the problem here? Mbeki, my good friend Mbeki, was cut short. Zuma was cut short. This one also looks shaky. And I am from a point, this is the Matanga you hear about in whole Africa. One of the problems we have, Dr. Madaza, is we have a very poor African Union that would have resolved some of these difficulties before our countries go down. The first thing that I want to tell you, South Africans, and I am happy, all Africans who are on this platform, is I'm happy that Dr. Madaza has woken up. We have lost the African Union. It is gone. It has been captured by Western Hemisphere countries in the metros of Europe. We have wars that they cannot solve. Now, coming back to South Africa, Ramaphosa, for me, you know, there is one thing I've been telling Madaza for all the time. There are people I never, if they die, I don't cry. There are some people who have mistreated people while they are alive. So when they die, I don't cry. And there are people in South Africa who should actually, I don't want to become controversial for the first time here, but Madaza knows my position. Some of these people are very corrupt. Corruption in South Africa is the center point that is killing all these younger men, the generation we are going to leave behind. I'm 68 years old, going home. What shall we leave behind here? We shall leave an empty South Africa. A South Africa without direction. A South Africa that lacks power now I was proud of a country that had power. We have blackouts. What is going on here? And these leaders walk around the whole planet, the whole Africa, signing agreements, you know, signing agreements of goodwill, sign this, they are making money for their families. And it is killing Africa. You are not alone. But one of the things that pains me as an African